I've always been one of those people who gets excited about birthdays, even my own. Maybe it's silly at 25, but I still wake up with that little flutter in my stomach, like something good might happen. That Tuesday morning in Chicago was no different. I'd been pulling 16-hour days at the marketing firm downtown for months, surviving on coffee and determination. But I told myself it would all be worth it. Maybe someone at the office would remember. Maybe there'd be cake in the break room, or at least a happy birthday from my team. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I practically lunged for it. A voice message from Mr. Richardson, my boss. That was unusual. He rarely called anyone directly, let alone sent voice messages. I pressed play, already imagining him saying something about taking the day off, or maybe even discussing that promotion he'd been hinting at. His voice came through the speaker, crisp and matter-of-fact, like he was ordering coffee. "Happy birthday! You're fired. Consider it a gift." I stared at the screen, waiting for the punchline that never came. The message was 12 seconds long. 12 seconds to destroy everything I'd been working toward. My hands started shaking as I played it again, thinking maybe I'd misheard. But no, there it was, clear as day. "Happy birthday. You're fired. Consider it a gift." I stumbled to the kitchen where my husband David was making his usual breakfast of instant oatmeal and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he saw my face, and I thrust the phone toward him, my voice barely working. "Listen to this," I managed to say. David took the phone, played the message, and then something happened that I'll never forget. He laughed. Not a shocked laugh or a nervous laugh, but a genuine, amused chuckle, like someone had just told him a decent joke. "Wow," he said, handing the phone back. "That's pretty cold, even for Richardson." I stood there in our tiny kitchen, still in my pajamas, watching my husband go back to his oatmeal like nothing had happened. Like my entire world hadn't just collapsed into those 12 seconds. "That's it?" I asked. "That's all you have to say?" He shrugged. "What do you want me to say, Sarah? You've been complaining about that job for months. Maybe this is a good thing." But it wasn't a good thing. That job was everything. My identity, my routine, my proof that I was somebody worth something. I'd started there right out of college, worked my way up from intern to junior account manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And now it was gone. Dismissed in a voice message on my birthday like I was some kind of inconvenience he finally got around to dealing with. I spent the rest of the morning pacing around our apartment, calling the HR department, trying to understand what had happened. But it was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Richardson had apparently cleaned out my desk the night before. Security had been told not to let me in the building. My work email was already deactivated. David left for his job at the construction company without saying goodbye, and I found myself alone with the silence and the growing panic in my chest. Rent was due in 10 days. We had maybe $2,000 in our checking account. My car payment was next week. The bills that had seemed manageable when I had a steady paycheck now looked like mountains I'd never be able to climb. I called my mom in Milwaukee, but she was at work and couldn't talk long. "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear the worry in her voice even through the phone. "I'm sure something will work out. You're smart and hardworking. Someone will snap you up in no time." But as I sat in our living room that afternoon, staring at job posting websites that all seemed to require experience I didn't have, or connections I'd never made, I didn't feel smart or hardworking. I felt small and stupid and completely lost. When David came home that evening, he found me still in my pajamas, surrounded by printed resumes and a laptop with 15 different job sites open. He looked at the mess I'd made of our coffee table and shook his head. "You know," he said, opening a beer, "maybe you should think of this as a vacation. When's the last time you had a real break? A vacation? Like getting fired was some kind of gift I should be grateful for. Like the terror I felt about our future was just me being dramatic. I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that this wasn't some blessing in disguise, but I was too tired to fight, too scared to push him when I felt like everything else in my life was already falling apart. So I just nodded and went to bed early, leaving him watching TV in the living room, the sound of some sitcom laugh track following me down the hall. I lay there in the dark, listening to the city sounds outside our window, wondering how a day that started with such hope could end with me feeling so completely alone. That night, I dreamed about the office, about my desk with the little succulent plant I'd bought, about the team meetings where I'd finally started speaking up with my ideas. In the dream, I was still there, still part of something. But then I'd wake up and remember, happy birthday, you're fired. Consider it a gift. Wednesday morning came too soon and too slow at the same time. I woke up with that split second of normalcy before reality crashed back in. No alarm clock, no rush to get dressed, nowhere to be. The emptiness felt heavier than any busy day I'd ever had. David was already gone. He'd started leaving earlier ever since I got fired, like he couldn't stand to be around my unemployment. The apartment felt different in the morning light, bigger somehow, like it was mocking me with all this space I now had to fill. I made coffee and opened my laptop, determined to be productive. Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor. I bookmarked positions and started filling out applications, but everything required experience I was just barely shy of, or skills that sounded impressive but foreign. Marketing automation specialist, senior brand strategist, digital campaign manager. The words started blurring together after a while. By noon, I'd submitted maybe 3 applications and felt completely drained. I kept checking my phone, hoping someone from the office might text to say this was all a mistake, that Richardson had lost his mind, and I should come back immediately. But my phone stayed quiet, and the silence in the apartment started to feel like it had weight. David came home for lunch, which he never used to do. He made himself a sandwich and stood at the kitchen counter eating it while I sat at the table with my laptop. "How's the job hunt going?" he asked, but not in a way that suggested he actually wanted to know. "Fine," I said. "I've applied to a few places." "That's good." He finished his sandwich and rinsed his plate. "You know, maybe you could use this time to finally clean out that spare bedroom. It's been a disaster for months." I stared at him. "I've been unemployed for 1 day, David. I'm just saying, you've got time now. Might as well be productive. Time. Like unemployment was this luxury I should be grateful for. Like I was on some extended weekend instead of facing the complete collapse of my career and our financial stability." After he left, I did try to clean the spare bedroom. But every box I opened seemed to contain reminders of the person I used to be. College textbooks, certificates from workshops, photos from office parties where I looked happy and confident. I ended up sitting on the floor, surrounded by the debris of my ambitions, feeling more lost than ever. Thursday was worse. I woke up at 10, which felt both lazy and depressing. I'd always been an early riser, someone who got things done, who had places to be. Now I was the kind of person who slept until 10 on a weekday and had nothing to show for it. I applied to 2 more jobs half-heartedly, but mostly I found myself staring at the wall, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The apartment that had felt too big yesterday now felt like it was closing in on me. I took a shower just to have something to do, then got dressed just to feel human, then sat back down at the kitchen table and felt ridiculous for the effort. David came home that night with takeout Chinese food, and the kind of forced cheerfulness that felt worse than his indifference. "Look at you, all relaxed," he said, setting down the bags. "You look better already, less stressed." But I didn't feel less stressed. I felt like I was floating, unmoored from everything that had given my life structure and meaning. When he made jokes about my so much free time now, I pretended not to hear him, but each comment felt like a small cut. We ate dinner watching TV, some reality show where people competed for money they desperately needed. I found myself identifying too much with the contestants, with their barely hidden desperation and forced smiles. When one of them broke down crying after losing a challenge, David laughed and said something about drama queens, but I had to leave the room. That night, my phone started buzzing. The first call came around 9, and I ignored it, thinking it was a spam call. Then another. Then another. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the persistence felt urgent. By the time I went to bed, I had 45 missed calls from the same number. I lay there listening to David snore, staring at my phone screen showing those missed calls, feeling like I was losing my mind. Who calls someone 45 times in one evening? I thought about waking David to ask what he thought, but I could already imagine his reaction. Probably something about changing my number, or how this was just another thing I was being dramatic about. Friday morning brought more calls. I woke up to find my phone buzzing on the nightstand, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. By the time I was fully awake, there were over 100 missed calls total. The number staring back at me, 145 missed calls, made my hands shake. David found me in the kitchen, staring at my phone with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, not unkindly, but not with much concern either. "Someone's been calling me. A lot." He glanced at my phone. "Probably a telemarketer with a broken system. Just block the number." But something about the calls felt different from spam. The timing, the persistence. It felt human. Desperate, maybe, but human. In a week where I'd felt invisible and forgotten, where even my own husband seemed annoyed by my presence, those calls were the only thing that suggested someone, somewhere, actually wanted to reach me. I couldn't shake the feeling that answering might be dangerous, but ignoring them was driving me crazy. The silence in my house, in my marriage, in my life, was suffocating. These calls were the only noise that seemed to cut through it, the only indication that I still existed in someone's world. The phone buzzed again, the same number, and I found myself staring at it like it might hold answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. Saturday came with a sunset that painted our apartment walls orange and gold, but I barely noticed. I'd been staring at my phone all day, watching it ring and ring from that same persistent number. The calls had continued through Friday night and all day Saturday, sometimes every few minutes, sometimes with longer breaks that gave me false hope that whoever it was had finally given up. David had gone out with his friends to watch some game at Murphy's Pub, leaving me alone with my anxiety and the endless ringing. I'd started keeping the phone on silent, but I could see the screen lighting up constantly, like a strobe light of someone's desperation to reach me. Around 6 p.m, as the light was starting to fade outside our windows, the phone rang again. Same number. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. My thumb hovered over the decline button like it had dozens of times before, but something in me snapped. I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. I answered. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "Oh my God, thank you for picking up." The voice on the other end was female, breathless, with a slight tremor that might have been nerves or relief. "I'm so sorry for calling so much. I didn't know how else to reach you." Something about the voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. It had been years since I'd heard it, and the desperation was throwing me off. "Who is this?" I asked. "It's Clara Martinez. We were roommates at Northwestern. I know it's been forever, and I know this is crazy, but I've been trying to reach you for 2 days straight. Clara, my college roommate." I sank onto the couch as the memories came flooding back. Late nights studying in our tiny dorm room, sharing takeout Thai food, talking about our dreams and plans for after graduation. We'd been close for those 4 years, but after college, life had pulled us in different directions. I'd moved to Chicago for my job. She'd gone to San Francisco for some startup opportunity. We'd exchanged a few texts for the first year or so, but eventually, like so many college friendships, ours had faded into occasional social media likes and birthday wishes. "Clara, how did you even get this number?" "I called your mom. I hope that's okay." I told her it was urgent. She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Sarah, I saw what happened. On LinkedIn. That post your boss made." My stomach dropped. "What post? You don't know?" Clara's voice got softer, more careful. "Richardson posted something about letting people go, made some joke about birthday gifts. It went kind of viral, not in a good way. People were sharing it, talking about how cruel it was. I saw your name and I couldn't believe it. I felt sick. It was bad enough that I'd been fired in a voice message on my birthday, but now it was public. People were sharing it online like some kind of entertainment. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I know we haven't talked in years, but when I saw that, I remembered how hardworking you were in college, how ambitious. You were always talking about making it in marketing, proving yourself. Seeing someone treat you like that just made me furious. I was quiet for a moment, trying to process this. Clara had remembered me. Not only remembered me, but remembered my dreams, my work ethic, the person I'd been back when I still believed in myself. Why did you call so many times? I asked. Because I have something to tell you, and I was worried you'd think it was spam or something. She paused again. I work at a startup here in San Francisco now. We're called Bright Digital, and we're growing fast. My boss just approved budget for a new content marketing team, and they want me to find someone to lead it. When I saw what happened to you, I thought, if you're interested, I'd love to get you an interview. I sat there on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, wondering if I was dreaming. A week ago, I'd had one job that I'd just lost. Now someone was offering me an interview for what sounded like a better opportunity, and it was coming from someone who'd known me back when I still believed I could conquer the world. Are you serious? I managed to ask. Dead serious. I know it's sudden, and I know it would mean relocating. But Sarah, you were always so creative with your ideas. Remember that campaign you came up with for the student government election? You turned a boring candidate into someone people actually cared about. That's exactly what we need here. I remembered that campaign. It had been my junior year, and I'd volunteered to help this guy who was running for student body president, but had about as much charisma as a paper bag. I'd created this whole narrative around him being the underdog who actually cared about students instead of just padding his resume. He'd won by the biggest margin in the school's history. I can't promise you'll get the job, Clara continued, but I can promise you'll get a fair shot. And honestly, after seeing how that asshole treated you, I want to prove to you that not all bosses are sociopaths. I started crying. Not the desperate, scared crying I'd been doing for the past few days, but something different. Relief, maybe. Or hope. For the first time since Tuesday morning, someone was talking to me like I was valuable, like I had something to offer. Clara, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Say you'll let me set up a video interview for next week. Yes, I said, my voice cracking. Yes, I'll do the interview. Really? She sounded almost as relieved as I felt. Oh my God, that's amazing. I'm going to email you all the details. Sarah, I really think this could be great for you. The company culture here is so different from those corporate places. People actually support each other. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, holding my phone and feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in days. Clara had called 145 times because she believed in me. She'd hunted down my mother's phone number and called a stranger because she remembered who I used to be and thought I deserved better. When David came home from the bar, slightly drunk and in a good mood from his team winning, he found me sitting in the dark, smiling. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, flipping on the light. "I got a job interview," I said. His expression shifted, the good mood fading slightly. "Where?" "San Francisco. It's a startup. My old college roommate works there." "San Francisco?" He sat down heavily in his chair. "That's across the country, Sarah." "I know." "So what? You're just going to pack up and leave?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that the idea of leaving didn't scare me the way it should have. The idea of staying scared me more. "It's just an interview, David. We'll see what happens." But even as I said it, I knew something had changed. Clara's call had reminded me of who I used to be, the person who took chances and believed in herself. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe that person was still in there somewhere, just waiting for the right opportunity to come back to life. The week leading up to my video interview with Bright Digital felt like living in two different worlds. In one world, I was researching the company, practicing my answers, and feeling more energized than I had in months. In the other world, I was watching my marriage crumble in real time, and David seemed determined to make sure I knew exactly how he felt about my potential escape route. Monday morning, I set up a workspace in our spare bedroom, clearing away the boxes I'd abandoned the week before. I printed out the company information Clara had sent me, made notes about their recent campaigns, and even bought a new blouse for the interview. For the first time since getting fired, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just treading water. David found me there around noon, surrounded by papers and highlighters, my laptop open to Bright Digital's website. "You're really taking this seriously," he said, but it didn't sound like a compliment. "Of course I am. This is a real opportunity." He picked up one of the printouts, scanning it with a skeptical expression. "Content marketing director. In San Francisco. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live there?" Clara said the salary is competitive. And anyway, they haven't offered me the job yet. Right, because your college roommate is going to magically fix your career. He dropped the paper back on the desk. Sarah, you know this is probably just a pity interview, right? She felt bad about what happened and threw you a bone. The words hit me like a slap. A pity interview. I'd been so focused on the hope Clara had given me that I hadn't considered that possibility. But now David had planted the seed of doubt, and I could feel it taking root. That's not what this is, I said, but my voice sounded less certain than I wanted it to. Isn't it? When's the last time you two even talked? 4 years? 5? And suddenly, she's your career savior? He sat on the edge of the bed, and his tone shifted to something that might have been meant as gentleness, but felt condescending. Look, I get that you're desperate right now, but you need to be realistic. This isn't going to lead anywhere. I stared at him, feeling something inside me start to harden. Why are you being like this? Like what? Honest? Someone has to be. He stood up, heading for the door. I just don't want you to get your hopes up for nothing. You've been through enough disappointment already. But it didn't feel like protection. It felt like sabotage. Tuesday night, we had our first real fight about it. I'd spent the day preparing, had even done a practice video call with Clara to test the technology and get comfortable with the format. She'd been encouraging and professional, going over the kinds of questions her boss might ask and sharing insights about the company culture. I felt ready, confident even. David came home from work to find me cooking dinner and humming under my breath. I'd been in such a good mood that I'd decided to make his favorite, homemade lasagna, thinking maybe we could have a nice evening together before my big day. You seem happy, he said, but it sounded almost accusatory. I am. I think tomorrow's going to go well. Right. The pity interview. There it was again. I set down the wooden spoon I'd been using to stir the sauce and turned to face him. Stop calling it that. What would you call it then? A real job opportunity? Sarah, be honest with yourself. You got fired from a mid-level marketing job in Chicago. Now you think you're qualified to run a whole department at some trendy startup? I've been working in marketing for 3 years. I have experience. You have experience following orders and making PowerPoints. That's not the same thing as leadership. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the man who was supposed to believe in me, support me, help me rebuild after the worst week of my professional life. Instead, he was systematically tearing down the first good thing that had happened to me since Richardson's voice message. Why are you doing this? I asked. Doing what? Trying to convince me I'm going to fail before I even try. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he said, because I don't want you to leave. The honesty of it caught me off guard, but not in a good way. This wasn't love or concern. It was possession. He didn't want me to succeed because my success might take me away from him, and he'd rather see me fail and stay than thrive and go. So you'd rather I be unemployed and miserable than happy somewhere else? I'd rather you be realistic about your options. We didn't speak much during dinner. The lasagna that I'd made with such hope an hour earlier tasted like cardboard. David ate in silence, scrolling through his phone between bites, and I found myself watching him like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. When had he become this person? When had his first instinct become to doubt me instead of encourage me? I thought about all the times over the past few years when I'd had ideas for my career, dreams about what I wanted to accomplish, and how he'd always found ways to poke holes in them. I'd thought he was being practical, helping me stay grounded. Now I wondered if he'd been keeping me small on purpose. After dinner, he disappeared into the living room to watch TV, and I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up and thinking. When I finally joined him on the couch, some action movie was playing, and he seemed absorbed in it. I tried to focus on the screen, but my mind kept wandering to Clara's voice on the phone, to the excitement in her tone when she talked about the opportunity, to the way she'd remembered my ambitions from college. During a commercial break, David turned to me and said, "You know, if this doesn't work out, there are plenty of marketing jobs here in Chicago. Maybe something at a smaller company would be a better fit anyway." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that he was already planning my failure. He'd decided that I wouldn't get the job, that I'd come back defeated and grateful to settle for whatever scraps I could find locally. The certainty in his voice made my skin crawl. "What if it does work out?" I asked. "What?" What if I get the job? What if they offer it to me and I take it? He muted the TV and turned to face me fully. Sarah, we have a life here. We have an apartment, friends, family nearby. You can't just throw all that away for some fantasy job. It's not a fantasy. It's an opportunity. It's a pipe dream. And even if it wasn't, even if they did offer you something, we'd have to start over completely. New city, new expenses, and what am I supposed to do? Just quit my job and follow you across the country? I realized then that in all his criticism of my interview, in all his insistence that I wouldn't get the job, he'd never once considered what would happen if I did. He'd never thought about us as a team figuring out a big change together. He'd only thought about the ways my potential success might inconvenience him. We could figure it out, I said quietly. No, Sarah, we couldn't. And you know what? I don't think you really want this job anyway. I think you're just running away from dealing with what happened here. That night, I lay in bed listening to him sleep and feeling more alone than I had even in those first terrible days after getting fired. The man lying next to me, the person who was supposed to be my partner in life, had made it clear that he'd rather see me shrink back into the small, defeated version of myself than risk losing control of our situation. I thought about Clara's voice on the phone, about the way she'd talked about the person I used to be in college. That person wouldn't have tolerated this. That person would have seen David's behavior for what it was. Fear disguised as concern. Control disguised as love. As I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Chicago outside our window, I made a decision. If I got this job, I was taking it. With or without David's support. With or without David at all. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes from a sleepless night of important decisions. I woke up at 5:30, 2 hours before my alarm, and found myself strangely calm. David was still sleeping beside me, and for once his presence didn't bring comfort or annoyance, just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that this might be one of our last mornings like this. I made coffee quietly and set up my laptop in the spare bedroom, checking my internet connection and testing my camera angle for the third time since yesterday. The interview was scheduled for 11, which meant 8 o'clock Pacific time for them. Clara had warned me that her boss, James Chen, was the kind of person who valued authenticity over polish, which both relaxed and terrified me. By 9, I was dressed in my new blouse and the blazer I'd borrowed from my neighbor across the hall. I'd practiced my answers so many times that I was worried they'd sound rehearsed, but Clara had assured me that James would likely go off script anyway. He's more interested in how you think than what you know, she'd said. David emerged from the bedroom around 9:30, already dressed for work, and found me doing final checks on my setup. Big day, he said, and I couldn't tell if he was being sincere or sarcastic. Yeah. You ready? I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of genuine support, any indication that he wanted this to go well for me. What I saw instead was resignation, like he was watching me prepare for something he'd already decided would fail. I think so. He nodded and headed for the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close behind him. No, good luck. No, I believe in you. Just the sound of him leaving for another day at a job he'd never once doubted he deserved. At exactly 11 o'clock, my laptop chimed with the video call notification. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair one last time, and clicked accept. James Chen appeared on my screen, sitting in what looked like a bright modern office with plants and exposed brick walls. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with an easy smile and the kind of relaxed confidence that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. Sarah, great to meet you. Clara's told me so much about you. It's great to meet you too. Thank you for taking the time. Of course. Before we dive in, I have to say, I saw what happened with your previous employer. Richardson, right? That guy's a piece of work. I actually know someone who used to work there, and let's just say his reputation precedes him. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. It wasn't exactly the career transition I'd planned. The best ones never are. James leaned back in his chair. So tell me, what excites you about content marketing? Not what you think I want to hear, but what actually gets you energized about this field? Something in his tone, in the way he asked the question, made me forget about all my prepared answers. Instead, I found myself talking about the student government campaign from college, about how I'd discovered that good marketing wasn't about manipulation, but about finding the true story that people needed to hear. I love the puzzle of it, I heard myself saying. You have this product or service or person, and somewhere out there are people who need exactly what they're offering, but they don't know it yet. Marketing is building the bridge between those two worlds. James nodded, genuinely engaged. That's a beautiful way to put it. Can you give me an example of a time when you built one of those bridges? I told him about a campaign I'd worked on at my old job, one that Richardson had ultimately killed because he thought it was too risky. It had been for a local nonprofit that helped elderly people stay in their homes instead of moving to assisted living facilities. My idea had been to focus not on the services themselves, but on the stories of independence and dignity that those services made possible. Richardson said it was too emotional, that B2B marketing should focus on features and benefits. But I knew the decision makers, usually adult children, weren't really buying a service. They were buying peace of mind about their parents' well-being and autonomy. What happened to the campaign? It never saw the light of day. Richardson went with something about cost savings and efficiency metrics instead. James shook his head. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to move away from here. People don't buy products, they buy better versions of themselves. You get that. The conversation flowed from there in ways I hadn't expected. Instead of grilling me about my experience with specific software or asking hypothetical questions about campaign budgets, James wanted to know how I approached problems, how I handled creative disagreements, what I thought was broken about the marketing industry. When he asked about leadership experience, I was honest about not having managed a large team before, but I talked about the informal mentoring I'd done with newer employees, about the times I'd stepped up to coordinate projects when no one else would take the lead. Leadership isn't always about having a title, I said. Sometimes it's about being the person who's willing to say what everyone else is thinking, or to take responsibility when things go wrong, or to fight for an idea even when it's not popular. Have you had to do that? Fight for an idea that wasn't popular? I thought about all the times I'd pitched concepts to Richardson only to watch him dismiss them without real consideration. About the presentations I'd prepared that never got presented. The strategies I'd developed that never got implemented. More times than I care to count. I learned that sometimes you have to be willing to be wrong if you want the chance to be right. James smiled at that. Clara mentioned you were thoughtful. She didn't mention you were philosophical. We talked for almost an hour. Far longer than the 30 minutes Clara had prepared me for. When James finally started to wrap up, I realized I'd forgotten to be nervous. This hadn't felt like an interview. It had felt like a conversation between two people who understood something important about work and creativity and the way ideas could change things. Sarah, I have to ask, this role would mean relocating to San Francisco. That's a big change. Are you prepared for that? I am, I said, and I meant it completely. What about your husband? Clara mentioned you're married. For just a moment, I hesitated. Then I thought about David's voice telling me this was a pity interview, about his certainty that I would fail, about the way he'd rather see me small and local than successful and far away. If I get this job, I'll figure out the personal logistics. This opportunity is too important to let geography stop me. James nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty. Listen, I'm going to be direct with you. I have 2 other candidates to interview, but between you and me, you're exactly what we're looking for. Someone who understands that marketing is about human connection, who's not afraid to take creative risks, and who has the resilience to rebuild after a setback. My heart started racing. That sounds promising. It is. I'll be making a decision by Friday, and Clara will call you either way. But Sarah, start thinking about when you could start. I have a feeling we're going to want to move quickly on this. After we hung up, I sat in the spare bedroom for a long time, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. I looked different somehow. More alert, more alive than I had in weeks. The conversation with James had reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I was good at this. I had ideas worth fighting for, insights worth sharing, energy worth investing. When David came home that evening, he found me cooking dinner again. But this time I was humming a different tune. How did it go? He asked, and I could hear him trying to sound casual. Really well. Better than I expected. That's good. He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. But interviews can be deceiving. Sometimes you think they went great and then you never hear back. I looked at him standing there in our kitchen, already working to diminish my happiness, already preparing me for disappointment he seemed to hope would come. And I realized that no matter what happened with Bright Digital, I couldn't stay married to someone who was more invested in my failure than my success. James said he'd have a decision by Friday. James? The hiring manager. He was really engaged with my ideas. We talked for over an hour. David took a long sip of his beer. Well, don't get too excited. You know how these startup guys are. They promise the world during interviews and then hire someone's nephew. I turned off the stove and faced him fully. Why can't you just be happy for me? I am happy for you. I just don't want you to be crushed if this doesn't work out. But what if it does work out, David? What if they offer me the job and it's everything I hoped for? What if I could actually be happy again? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his beer bottle. Finally, he said, "Then I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." But I was already crossing it. In my mind, I was already packing my bags. Friday came with the weight of possibility hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Clara had said she'd call by end of business, West Coast time, which meant I had until 6 o'clock Chicago time to know whether my life was about to change completely or stay exactly the same. I spent the morning trying to distract myself with mundane tasks, grocery shopping, laundry, organizing the kitchen cabinets, but everything felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. David had left for work with barely a word, just a grunt of acknowledgement when I said good morning. The tension between us had become so thick it was almost visible. Around noon, my phone rang, and my heart jumped before I saw it was my mom calling from Milwaukee. "Hi, honey. I was thinking about you today. Any word on that interview?" "Not yet. They said by today." "Well, I've been praying about it. You know I don't usually get involved in these things, but that girl Clara sounds like a godsend. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are just clearing the way for something better." I told my mom the basic story, the firing, Clara's call, the interview, but I hadn't mentioned David's reaction or the growing certainty that this job might mean the end of my marriage. Some conversations were too big for phone calls with your mother. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you when I know something." "You do that. And Sarah, whatever happens, I'm proud of you for trying. You've got more courage than you give yourself credit for." After we hung up, I found myself crying a little, not from sadness, but from the relief of hearing someone express confidence in me. It had been so long since anyone had told me I was brave or capable that I'd almost forgotten those qualities might still exist inside me. The afternoon crawled by with the particular agony that comes from waiting for news that could change everything. I checked my phone obsessively, made sure the ringer was on, tested the volume twice. I even called Clara's number just to make sure I could reach her line, hanging up before it connected. At 5:30, I was pacing around the apartment when my phone finally rang. Clara's name on the screen made my hand shake so badly I almost dropped it. "Clara?" "Sarah." Her voice was bright, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have news." My heart stopped. "Good news or bad news?" "The best news. James wants to offer you the position." I sat down hard on the couch, suddenly dizzy. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. He called me an hour after your interview on Wednesday and said you were exactly what they were looking for. The only reason it took until today was because he had to get final approval on the salary package." "What kind of salary package?" Clara named a number that was 40% higher than what I'd been making in Chicago, plus equity in the company, plus a signing bonus to help with relocation costs, plus health insurance that actually covered things. "Sarah, are you there?" I was crying again, but this time it was pure joy mixed with terror, mixed with relief. "I'm here. I can't believe this is real." "It's real. James wants you to start as soon as possible, ideally within the next 3 weeks. I know that's fast, but we have a big campaign launch coming up and he really wants you leading it." 3 weeks. Enough time to give notice at. Well, I didn't have a job to give notice to. Enough time to pack my life, find an apartment in San Francisco, and figure out what to do about David. "Clara, thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough for this. You don't need to thank me. You got this job because you're talented and James could see that. I just made the introduction." After we hung up, I sat in the living room as the sun set outside our windows, holding my phone and trying to process what had just happened. 2 weeks ago, I'd been fired in a voice message on my birthday. Now, I had a job that paid more money than I'd ever made, in a city I'd always wanted to visit, working for someone who actually valued my ideas. David came home around 7, and I was still sitting in the same spot on the couch, probably looking shell-shocked. "What's wrong?" he asked, and I realized he was expecting bad news. "I got the job." He stopped halfway through, taking off his jacket. "What?" Clara called. "They offered me the position. Content marketing director at Bright Digital. I got the job, David." I watched his face go through a series of expressions. Surprise, followed by something that might have been pride, followed quickly by what looked like panic. "Wow, that's great, Sarah. Really great." He finished hanging up his jacket, moving slowly like he was thinking hard about something. "So what happens now?" "They want me to start in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? He sat down in the chair across from me, not on the couch beside me. "That's not much time." "No, it's not." We looked at each other across the coffee table, and I could see him doing the math in his head. The logistics of moving, the cost of starting over, the reality that his wife was about to become the kind of person who got headhunted for jobs across the country. "I guess we need to start looking at apartments in San Francisco," he said finally. "Do we?" The question hung in the air between us. David's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do we need to start looking at apartments? Do you want to come with me?" "Of course I want to come with you. You're my wife." But he said it like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. And I realized that in all the conversations we'd had about this opportunity, all his predictions of failure, all his skepticism about my qualifications, we'd never actually talked about what would happen if I succeeded. "David, be honest with me. Are you happy about this?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm proud of you. I really am. It's just a lot to process. But are you happy about it?" Another pause. "I'm scared about it. I have a good job here, friends. A routine that works. Starting over in a new city, trying to find work in a place where I don't know anyone. It's terrifying." I understood his fear. I was scared too, but there was something else in his voice, something that sounded less like fear and more like resentment. "What if you stayed here?" I heard myself ask. What if I took the job and you stayed in Chicago? At least at first, until we figure things out." David stared at me like I'd suggested we burn the apartment down. "You want to move across the country without me? I want to take this job. And if you're not ready to come with me, I don't want your reluctance to poison this opportunity for me. So you'd rather leave me than give up the job." The way he phrased it made the choice clear. He was asking me to choose between my marriage and my career, between his comfort and my growth. A month ago, I might have chosen him, but that was before I'd remembered who I could be when someone believed in me. I'd rather take the job and see if we can make the rest work. That night, we barely spoke. David went to bed early, and I stayed up late researching neighborhoods in San Francisco, looking at apartment listings, calculating moving costs. It felt like planning an escape, which I suppose it was. The next morning, I called Clara and officially accepted the position. Then I called my mom and told her the good news. Then I started making lists: what to pack, what to sell, what to leave behind. David and I managed to avoid any serious conversations about the future for the next few days, but the tension was unbearable. Finally, the Tuesday before I was supposed to leave, he came home from work and found me packing boxes in the bedroom. "I've been thinking," he said. I looked up from the box of books I was taping shut. "Yeah? Maybe some time apart would be good for us. Give us both a chance to figure out what we really want." It was the most honest thing he'd said since I'd gotten the job offer. Maybe it would. "So you'll go to San Francisco, get settled, see how the job works out. And I'll stay here, keep working, keep the apartment. After a few months, we can talk about what comes next." I nodded, knowing that what came next was probably divorce papers, but grateful that he was finally being realistic about our situation. The night before I left, I stood in our bedroom looking at the suitcases and boxes that contained everything I was taking with me. It wasn't much: clothes, books, my laptop, a few photos. but it felt like everything that mattered. David was in the living room watching TV, and I joined him on the couch for what we both knew would probably be the last time. "I hope it works out for you," he said during a commercial break. "Thank you. And Sarah? I'm sorry I wasn't more supportive. I should have been happy for you from the beginning." I looked at him, seeing for the first time in weeks the man I'd fallen in love with instead of the stranger he'd become. "I know you were scared. Change is scary." "Yeah, but you were brave enough to try anyway. I should have been brave enough to support you." The next morning, he drove me to O'Hare Airport. We didn't talk much during the ride, but it wasn't the angry silence of the past few weeks. It was the quiet of two people who were finally being honest about what they both knew. At the departure gate, he hugged me tight and said, "Take care of yourself out there. You too." As my plane lifted off from Chicago, I pressed my face to the window and watched the city get smaller below me. Everything I'd known for 25 years was disappearing beneath the clouds, and everything I was moving toward was still unknown. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was excited by it. Clara picked me up at SFO, and as we drove into the city, she kept pointing out landmarks and neighborhoods, chattering about the best coffee shops and hiking trails. The energy was infectious. Even the traffic felt different. Not the grinding frustration of Chicago gridlock, but the busy optimism of a place where people were always moving toward something better. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she asked as we pulled up to the corporate housing apartment Bright Digital had arranged for my first month. "Terrified," I admitted, but also ready. A year later, I'm writing this from my permanent apartment in the Mission District, looking out at a view of the city that still makes me smile every morning. I lead a team of 8 incredible people, and we've launched 3 campaigns that have won industry awards. Clara and I get coffee every Friday and laugh about how college Sarah would react to seeing us now. David and I finalized our divorce 6 months ago. It was sad, but not bitter. We both knew we'd grown into people who wanted different things from life. He's seeing someone new, a teacher who loves Chicago as much as he does. I'm happy for him. I've started mentoring young women in marketing, especially those who've faced setbacks or discrimination. I tell them what Clara told me, and what I wish someone had told me sooner. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is just life clearing the path for something better. Last month was my 26th birthday, and instead of dreading it, I celebrated. My team surprised me with a cake. Clara took me to dinner at the best restaurant in the city, and I went to bed that night feeling grateful for everything that had led me here. Even Richardson's cruel voice message, even David's lack of faith, even all those terrifying days when I thought my life was falling apart. Because it wasn't falling apart. It was falling into place. I just couldn't see it at the time.